If we're all up here and we're in that stress mode, we need to move that energy down through our chakras and put it into the ground. Whatever that biohack is for you of self-care, then we can start working in putting a new thing in place that's healthier. So the void is not empty, because when you remove something like alcohol or food, uh, you need to replace it with something else. And so that's the cool stuff about NLP, is it gives new strategies.
Welcome to the Sober Edge podcast, inspiration for alcohol-free living. I'm your host, Terry Patterson, functional nutritionist and This Naked Mind senior coach. The Sober Edge is a place to explore the infinite possibilities on the other side of drinking. In a culture soaked in booze, discover the wonder and joy of taking a different path. Meet real people living lives of purpose and passion. Learn the truth behind the alcohol myths and get ready to be motivated, inspired, and astounded by what is possible with the Sober Edge. Today, I'm joined by my guest, Deborah Yager, who is the co-founder of Yager Training and True Alchemy. And this is exactly where the rubber meets the road, because her work is all about helping people understand the patterns beneath their behavior and how to actually change them. We touch on neuro-linguistic programming, eating disorders, alcohol use disorder, and most importantly, how to understand the patterns that might be holding you back, and how she helps people shift subconscious patterns into real and lasting change. I hope you enjoy this episode. You can connect with Deborah Yager at Yager Training or True Alchemy. Well, hey everyone, it's Terry back with another edition of the Sober Edge podcast, and I have a delightful guest today. We've just been getting to know one another, so I want to welcome Deborah Yager to the podcast. Deborah and her spouse, is that right to say, your husband?
Yes, Brandon.
Yes, have a beautiful offer in the world called Your True Alchemy, also known as Yager Training. And we're going to talk about where that intersects with your personal journey as part of the audience here with the Sober Edge podcast. So, Deborah, welcome.
Thank you, Terry. So happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about the what Your True Alchemy means to you and what you offer.
So to me, alchemy, they talk about the alchemists in ancient time, and they talk about how they were able, and it's metaphorical, right? That they were able to take this dense lead material, and through the process of transmutation, like boiling it down, separating it, fermenting it, going through all these different stages, which sometimes don't feel so great if you're looking at it from a spiritual lens, then to create perfected gold. And I really look at why we're here on this planet is to know thyself, to transform thyself, so then we can transform others. And so our personal story a lot of times can be pretty dark, right? Sometimes we have these ups and downs, and these parts of ourselves that we don't look at as negative. And I think that we come here to make a lot of mistakes and to learn from those mistakes, to alchemize through that learning, to then be able to serve at a deeper level. And everybody has a story. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners right now are sitting like, yeah, I have I've had some dark times. And I think that's actually the point of why we're here in a way.
So beautiful because, in the traditional 12-step recovery model, we think that, we have to recognize ourselves as having failed somewhere along the way. And what you're actually talking about, what is so beautiful, is that, oh, I came to make lots of mistakes. That's where the learning, that's where the growth, that's where the opportunity is. And that is so aligned with the way that I help people approach their own alcohol use disorder. Is that this is, ultimately in my life, Deborah, it's become a gift. When I was in my drinking days, I wasn't doing a podcast. I wasn't coaching. I wasn't showing up trying to, shine a light on our beautiful shared humanity and the process of discovery together.
Right, and because you went through all of that, you now have value and personal experience to share and have deeper levels of compassion. And, I look at, one of the things, so neuro-linguistic programming is one of the modalities we use. It's a science of the mind-body connection. It's a science of communication. Linguistics is the middle part of the acronym. And then we have programming, the programming we're running, whether we're getting the positive result we want or not, that we have the freedom to repattern it. And so language is really fascinating to me. And so, maybe some of your listeners do not know that the root of the word sin actually means separation and missing the mark. So I like to say hilariousness, like sinners welcome here, because I feel like we come down to separate from source intelligence, God, spirit, divine intelligence, to then come down and have this galactic experience in the physical plane of making mistakes, sinning over and over and over again, being perfectly imperfect, to then realize our divinity and to love on ourselves, to learn from our mistakes. And then, like what you're doing, is you're taking your personal story, your personal transformational experience, and then serving at a deeper level. And that's where the true healing happens, at least from what we've noticed over the years and my own personal transformation.
I'm fascinated by neuro-linguistic programming. I had this really cool divine experience that was just so serendipitous. I was flying home from a place from Colorado where I had connected with a bunch of clients who'd been in one of the alcohol-free programs that I coached in. And I sat next to a woman, and it turned out she is an NLP trainer. And get this, Deborah, she lives in my hometown. So when we were getting off
Cool.
the plane, she's like, "Oh, I'm headed to Grass Valley." And I'm like, "Wait a minute. I live in Grass Valley." And so I took, she came on my podcast a while back, and I also took one of her courses that she did locally just to kind of give an overview of NLP. And so that was not my first introduction to it, but I also am very fascinated by listening to the words that people use. And I think, like you said, language is a big part of that. And so when we recognize that we are actually either telling ourselves a story or using disempowering words, is that part of NLP?
Yes. So I didn't know that you lived in Grass Valley. One of my favorite interviewers on Gaia TV lives there. So I don't know if you're familiar with Regina. She lives in Grass Valley.
No, but you'll have to remind me after we
Yes.
hit stop
She
recording how I can connect with her. That sounds amazing.
So profound. So the language we use, so I actually call it slave language. And the reason why I say that is because we unconsciously have been programmed to use language that puts a prison around us. Most people say that we describe our world with language, but we know through NLP and quantum physics, right, is that frequency and vibration creates reality. And what you focus on, what you're speaking about, you bring about. And so the words that you're saying out loud are casting spells into reality. It's also telling your unconscious mind who to be. And so, like you said, if you're telling your story, that, for me personally, I used to say every single day when I would wake up in my life, I hate my life. And so, what do you think I was creating? A very destructive life for myself to then reflect back the words that I was saying out loud. And so, once you understand the power of the spoken word, and, I like to get pretty esoteric. One of my favorite things to do is look at different ancient texts around the world, and every single ancient text, whether it be the Bible, the Egyptian tradition, the Mayan tradition, the Norse tradition, Native American, they all knew that we have the power to speak things into existence. And so being very, very clear on what we're saying. And so words like I have to, I need to, I must, I should. We laugh in the NLP word like don't should on yourself. But don't should yourself for shoulding because don't shame yourself for shoulding, right? Because these types of things will then create the prison that you put yourself in there unconsciously by choice.
Mm. Yes, I was just doing a coaching session this morning around positive affirmations and the idea that we can have a gratitude practice that anchors us into now, but those positive affirmations can help us align our values and our future self with
Right.
action. And I think it's so exciting because we can transform everything. And so one of the clients this morning said, I hate it when I cry.
Mm.
I said, "Oh, that's such an interesting thought. So what is the root of that?" So she hates showing emotion. That
Right.
was what she shared. And so we talked about how she could craft an affirmation to embrace those beautiful, deep emotions, you know?
Right, and then I get curious too. So one of the things with the neuro-linguistic programming is we come in from a mindset of we don't know anything and we're super curious about everything with wonder and joy. And so looking at that is like, okay, so I'm super curious about where did you decide to accept that consciously or unconsciously in your life, most likely childhood, where something happened. And then all of a sudden, that seed was implanted that then creates this belief system. And then the belief system is the law in the universe that then starts attracting certain things and events that then reaffirms that belief system, that then it becomes an identity at that level. And then that is who you are. However, the good news is that you can change all that because as easily as it was implanted, it is that easy to change out the seed and put a new one to then create a new identity, which is really fascinating and fun.
Yes, and it's so interesting that you said that, Deborah, because when I was in my drinking days, so I've been alcohol free for just over 10 years. I came to it late in life. I did not stop drinking till I was 55 years old. So I had had years and years and years of patterning that story, the self-talk, kind of being addicted to chaos, just like life was challenging. And the more challenging it was, the more challenging it got. And the more I focused on the challenges, of course, on and on and on. And one thing that was really missing in my life is curiosity. And I have just embraced curiosity as one of my guiding principles since I've become alcohol free, and it has served me so well. And one of the things that I thought I came up with this idea, you're going to laugh because everybody knew this but me. But I was like, guess what, people? When you lead with curiosity, you suspend judgment.
Right.
Then I was reading something one time and it was like, that is the definition. And I was like, oh, okay, go, Terry.
Well, it's you were downloading it, right? And I say the same thing in a different way. I say curiosity it transmutes shame.
Hmm.
Because judgment is connected to shame and guilt, right? So I feel like that just that simple shift, if we can look at our own behavior, our own failures, other people outside ourselves with curiosity and wonder, a fascination. Another NLP presupposition is that people are not their behaviors. Accept a person, work on the behavior because every behavior, I mean, I look back at me, behaving in the chaos that I was unconsciously creating. Um, because at the root for me, so my upbringing, I had a dynamic where the way that I perceive the environment is that you got more love and attention if you were broken, there's something wrong with you, if you're sick and or chaos. And so there was this drive inside of me, an identity that the more chaos, the more brokenness, whether it be good attention or bad attention, would then equal love. And you could see how that could create quite the strategy of chaos. And when you come at it from a fascination of curiosity, it's like, oh, wow, that's really fascinating. Like, for what purpose would you create something like that? And then you can have so much fun of learning about that part of yourself because at the end of the day, from my perspective, these behaviors are unintegrated children inside. Most of us have thousands of different parts of ourselves that are fragmented that we have then labeled as something that we don't like about ourselves, and this is where I get so excited because those parts, for an example, my chaos part or my numbing part or my judgmental part or the inner critic part or the let's get shit done and get together and like get better part, all of those parts were trying to help me. It's just that they had trauma, baggage, and lousy programming. And so once you get them all on board and they start working together, the behavior changes because they truly want you to be the best version of yourself. It's just that they have their own baggage and wounding.
Mm. I love that you describe it as fun because I get super energized by all of this, and not everyone does. I get that, we sometimes come reluctantly or we're coaxed into, understanding more about our inner world. But what you're talking about sounds a little bit like what we're now seeing sort of bubble up, which is this internal family systems.
Oh, yes.
So tell me how this intersects with, and tell the audience how this intersects with NLP. Like the root of this sounds similar.
So NLP has had different forms of parts integration for quite some time. Internal family systems is another thing that we bring. So we don't just work with NLP in our school. It's NLP, hypnosis, internal family systems, inner child healing work, somatic work, breath work, timeline work, regression work. We do past life regressions, epigenetics work. So we're bringing in all these modalities together and blending it into a magical process that you can use with different people because everybody responds a little different. And in the beginning of my coaching, I'm like, NLP is the only way, right? And quantum time techniques the only way to heal because that was my own personal journey. But over the years of working with different people with different types of trauma and addiction, finding that we needed more flexibility in the tools. And so we've taken a little bit of all these different traditions and brought them together in a new model. And that's really what NLP is. It's modeling excellent models that get amazing results. So everybody thinks that NLP is, these language patterns and these patterning tools and all that. And yes, it is, but the root of it is a modeling process. And so bringing it all together in a beautiful model.
I love that. Modeling excellent models.
Yeah.
And you said two things I want to dive into a little bit if we can. So I also have started, expanding my training so that I understand more about how this is integrated. One of the things that happened for me, Deborah, was my vibration just changed and shifted when I stopped drinking. And I attracted into my life almost immediately the opportunity to attend nutrition school.
Mm.
Not something that had been on my radar before. I was, I consider myself a foodie. I was a little bit passionate about, eating good food and being healthy. But I had never considered becoming a nutrition student. And so when I went to nutrition school, I actually became a functional nutritional therapy practitioner, which sounds like a lot, right?
No, that's
But
incredible.
yeah. And so from that place, I started to recognize, oh, this is a holistic journey. Because when I was drinking, and I say this often to my audience, I was just like a head walking around thinking I was going to think my way through everything. And oh, when I stopped drinking, I was like, oh, I have emotions. Oh, I have a body. Like, what's happening here? And so since that time, I've not only done nutrition training, but I've done affective liminal psychology, addiction, uh, psychology of addiction with Dr. Anna Lemke, and recently a nervous system course with Jessica McGuire. And this idea that bottom up, starting with our nervous system, I wonder how this enters into what you are exploring and teaching.
Yeah, so there's all different theories. There's the bottom up approach and then there's the top down approach. I say both.
Yes, yes.
I'm like, let's meet in the middle because both are necessary and usually at the same time. And I love that you shared with functional medicine. I'm not a functional medicine practitioner. However, a lot of in our certification programs, a lot of the people that come to us are functional medicine doctors, practitioners. And, I look back at my own personal journey. There's many reasons why I was using all the drugs as well as the alcohol. and also food addiction. I had body dysmorphia. I would binge and purge with food, and then I would take like methamphetamine to lose the weight, and it was like this manic up and down behavior for many, many years. And one of the things that I was looking for unconsciously, I realized that it was energy. And it was mitochondria dysfunction. So if your mitochondria and like, if your nervous system's on fire because you're eating all this terrible food and, not getting good rest, and then you're adding the alcohol and the drugs on top of that, I mean, of course, it's gonna be a mess of behavior and all of the things. And so having all of that, and I truly believe that we're moving into the world that we're gonna be looking at holistic health from a spiritual, a mental, emotional, and a physical plane aspect, and most people need a little bit of all, right? It's not one or the other. Now, sometimes people get massive transformation just from one modality. However, if you want to have an integrated life of health, joy, bliss, happiness, and being able to move through a very treacherous environment, having all of that attended to, from my perspective, is a really amazing path.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful. Yes, and I lived my whole life top down. So now I'm experiencing some bottom up, but I still use my very powerful brain. And one of the things that really struck me, particularly when it comes to something like addiction, is that we try to do a lot through our mind, but if our nervous system is dysregulated, we can't access all of the thinking parts of our brain. So we can't think our way out of everything. When our nervous system is in that place of that window of regulation or that sense of safety, we have access to our very powerful brain. And so it works exactly as you said in this integrated fashion where, top down, bottom up is we meet in the middle, which I love.
Yeah, I mean, if you have deep level toxicity, you have inflammation, and if your nervous system is on fire, you're not going to sleep well. And when you don't sleep well, then you have less discipline. I mean, it's just like a feedback loop of hell. And so, understanding that and working with both, I love that you're doing that. And I think this is the great work that we're here to bring forth, because most people don't realize that they're related, and nothing to put down allopathic modern medicine, but and, it's very compartmentalized, you know, psychology's here, health is here, and all the different things, and none of them are related, and all of it is related, from my perspective of what we've seen.
Yeah, and for so long, even when I stopped drinking in 2015, the newer methods of alcohol freedom and focusing on empowerment versus the disease model that you and I talked about earlier, um, this has shifted so much, and we actually are seeing that, oh, it's not behavior comes last. It's not about the behavior. It's actually about nervous system, emotional regulation, cognitive behavioral therapy, habit formation. And when we do that, then the behavior goes away.
Right,
We
naturally.
shift that behavior. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible. It's like magic in a lot of ways. And it also does take time. I mean, my rock bottom story started in 2011. Is it okay if I share a little bit about my
Yes,
background?
please. Yes.
So I was, like I said, I used to say I hate my life, and I was in a career that was completely wrong for me. And some of your listeners may feel like this because we have clients that are in the corporate world and they just feel like they're so trapped, um, and or whatever their job you have, where you feel like you have to put on a mask to survive, and you feel like your soul's leaving your body because the environment is toxic. And I didn't realize that that was because I kept saying that I hate my life, right? So casting spells into reality. I also listened to this language. I used to tell my girlfriends I'm a total loser magnet, and I didn't understand why. I would attract the same guy over and over again. And I would say, I will never do this again. And I would move from town to town, to state, and then I keep attracting the same abusive patterns. And just for a little context of the type of relationship I was in, is a lot of times the way that we'd break up is them going to jail. And so that's the kind of person that I thought I deserved. And at the core, I believed I deserved to be punished. And because I felt so broken inside, I would use, whether it be food, sex, drugs, alcohol, attention in all the wrong places. I felt like there was this bottomless void that I could never fill because I felt broken. And the career I was telling you about, I was a stripper and a sex worker, and I started that when I was 16. I hustled the first guy when I was 16 years old, and it's not because, that's something that you grow up and you're like, "I wanna be a stripper and a sex worker." Nothing against any of that because some women do it as a beautiful spiritual process, but the reason why I was doing it is because I didn't think I was good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough to do anything else. And this goes into the feeling of the body dysmorphia. So I had body dysmorphia, but I also at the same time thought that my looks were the only way that I could be successful. And so you could see how that could be a feedback loop of hell because everything that I did out of survival to look a certain way. And I think a lot of women are struggling with this right now in our society with Instagram and, looking, it's always been that way. When I was growing up, I was Twiggy and now it's the Kim Kardashian. Not that there's anything wrong with any of that. However, there's this perfect blueprint of what we're supposed to look like according to some marketers in some dark room somewhere in the high up Manhattan or wherever they come from. They're telling us how we need to look. And then anything that was not that is not good enough. And so all of this was coming out of a place of survival. And I remember, the one of the rock bottom moments, and a lot of people when they're in the addiction space, it's not just one, you have many. I wound up in jail for prostitution. It wasn't the first time. This time it was in Vegas and it was a little different because I was put into the general population for 72 hours and I had the orange jumpsuit and I'm sitting there in this room, in this cage, essentially looking at my destiny of other women that had murdered somebody, sometimes had accidentally done something that they're going to be in jail for a long time. And I realized if I didn't change something, this would be my destiny or even worse, dead. And so I started to search and I asked for spirit to guide me and then kind of forgot about it really to, get me out of the situation. But I just kept going on in my life as you do as an addict. And I bumped into the right person at the right time that then introduced me to this work. And I'm so grateful for my soul and me, my person that said yes to a 3-day event, which then they enrolled me into the next event where I had my miracle healing, where I cut out Xanax, Adderall, Oxycontins, Loratabs, smoking meth, and drinking about a fifth a day. I cut that out cold turkey after a process that we did. And I'm not saying that anybody should do that because the amount of stuff I was taking, you probably should go to the hospital to detox. But like this was my own personal path. And after that moment, for the very first time, that part of me that was constantly berating and saying that you're not worthy, that you're terrible, you're disgusting, the part of me that was driving to numb myself disappeared like that. And it was magic. And so, after that miracle healing, I call it, I was hooked, and so I ended up enrolling to the next program, and then the next training is where I met my husband, and I was still in Vegas, that's where we met, it's a love story, and he helped me get out of that environment, and this is so important, is that I had to cut all ties with everything, to cut that old identity out and to be put into a new environment where nobody knew me, where I essentially learned how to grow up because I was a 16-year-old girl in a 30-year-old body. I didn't even know how to, make my bed or do a shower or get motivated in the morning without Adderall, right? Because that was part of my strategy to then start making the changes to do the deep shadow work necessary to then heal the root cause of why the behavior was acting out in the addictive way. And so there's a long story after that, but that's essentially how I found this work. It was not by like, oh, I'm looking for personal growth. It was accidentally falling into it. And I know now that, I believe I have spiritual belief systems that my angels and my higher divine was like nudging me the entire time, protecting me. Just so many times that I would have almost not made it.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that very vulnerable and raw story. I think it will really touch a lot of the listeners. It certainly touches me. Um, you know, uh, your just a couple years younger than my oldest. So, I could look at you in that mother-daughter role and think, "Oh, sweetheart, that version of you that was trying so desperately to be seen and recognized and loved." And yeah, you did the survival tools that you knew at the time. And it's so powerful to embrace and integrate that into the new you. I mean, we shift our identity, but we don't vilify the tools that we use that got us to a place where we could recognize our value and our that small child inside of you that was born worthy and whole and not broken.
Right. Right, and now, that so this was 2013 when I met my husband, and then we started our business around 2014. I had to get out of my own way because a lot of people, including myself, felt like I was an imposter, right? Like, who would wanna learn from me, when I didn't even barely I got my GED, I didn't go to college, so I didn't have that academia background, but not realizing that I had chosen, whether it be consciously or unconsciously or spiritually, to go through a spiritual boot camp in order to have understanding and compassion. This goes back to everybody's story. Like, I chose this like very interesting path. And now I can sit with somebody and share the deepest parts of myself, and they feel free to also do the same, to where then we can say it out loud and we can let go of the shame. Shame, I feel like, is the driver. Shame and guilt are the driver, and fear. Those three are the driver for addiction. And it comes from feeling intrinsically broken, and we self-medicate, whether it be through food or alcohol or drugs. At least that was my personal path. And I share my story because I want people to realize that, everybody can do it, and your story is worthy and your story is powerful. Whoever's listening, if you're in the story, if you're out of the story, it's it's so beautiful and it's unique to you, and there's so much power in sharing the deepest darkest parts of ourselves.
Mm, absolutely. There's a saying that seems trivial compared to what you just shared, but I'll say it anyway. It is that our mess becomes our message.
100%. I just got the chills all over my body. Yes. The gift within the garbage. There's always
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and, I think that, the ability to share that from a place of strength is one of the gifts that you're sharing right now, because we we build resilience, we build understanding of who we are, we build compassion and empathy. Those things don't come lightly, and they are of such value to others. And I think that, when I went to nutrition school, I went because I was looking for something to distract my crazy alcohol-free brain, because I was just like, too much time and energy. I was working full time, had a family, but I still needed something else. And so I did that, and I met people, Deborah, who were on a healing journey
Right.
with food. And so nutrition was their story. It was that full circle. But that was not me. And I didn't recognize it at first, but like 3 months into our training, I did my community service project. And I said, I'm going to go to my church at the time, and I'm going to go to their Celebrate Recovery, and I'm going to talk about nutrition and alcohol use disorder. And I had no idea that I was casting forward this future role that I now get to embody. But I recognized that when I first heard that there was such a thing as alcohol-free coach and I could train to do that, I thought, that is the completion of my story. That is what I've lived. This is how I can be a powerful force for good, because I've lived it and I've embodied it, and I know the pain, and I know the challenges, and I know what I had to do how stuck I was. And I know the simple things that I had to do to start to embrace the possibility of change. And that wasn't there when it came to food. I mean, it's like, I love food. I could help people. Let's all be healthy. I like to drink green juice. You like to drink green tea. We're a match, you know? But it was only part of my story. And so
Right.
your experience is, resonates with people that have also struggled with some of those same challenges. And it is when we're able to share it freely, it really does feel like we're aligned with that passion, purpose, and our own humanity. Yes?
Yes. And, it's important to highlight that, the transformation around food, I think was probably for me harder than alcohol and drugs because you are required to eat every day. And when you're a food addict, it's not like you can just cut it out cold turkey. And when you're a food addict, at least for me personally, I would think about it all day long. Anytime that stress would happen, bing, I would get a little picture in my mind of like, oh, go and have some chocolate or a little niblet of a muffin or whatever, like the cookies laying around. Now we don't have that in the house. And, it was this way of self-medicating in a different way. And I did it even when I was drinking too. So that was part of the problem is that it was either the food or drugs or both. And then I used the drugs for a tool of losing the weight so then I could indulge in the food. And so if anybody is listening to this and they're struggling with the food, I have you, sister. I love you, and I want you to know that you're not alone, and you can over time transcend it because we've seen people that again when you start working with the deep root of where it came from the first place, I would notice that I would go for sweets when I was shaming myself, because think about it, I was trying to be giving myself sweetness and kindness through the food and nurture my inner child. Plus, in my family, not realizing it, my parents did the best they could with the resources they had, and by the way, they're still married and they're amazing humans. My parents uh, like you said, I was on a path, you saying that, you could be my mother. I mean, my poor mother and father had to watch their daughter take this deep dive into a despair, path. And now we have a great relationship and it's really beautiful. And they just had to watch, and so, again, if there's somebody that's having an experience with their child that they can't control because their kid is on the path of their own self-evolution, like, my soul had this path in order to grow to where now I am in this situation today. And my mom and dad, when I was growing up, one of the things that they would reward us with, and I think a lot of parents do this, is that, like, oh, you go to the doctor and so then you get an ice cream and then, or, you know, whatever it is, they reward you with food. And so that was a deep intrinsic part of my programming. Whether it's right or wrong, there is no right or wrong. It's how I perceived it. And then I use it as a strategy to cope. And so getting to the roots of this kind of stuff, then we can transcend it to then create a new strategy. So instead of going for the food, going outside and taking a couple of breaths or getting grounded. Because a lot of times, if we're all up here and we're in that stress mode, we need to move that energy down through our chakras and put it into the ground. Whatever that biohack is for you of self care, then we can start working in putting a new thing in place that's healthier, so the void is not empty because when you remove something like alcohol or food, uh, you need to replace it with something else. And so that's the cool stuff about NLP is it gives new strategies.
Hmm. Well, my audience is going to love this because they do have many of them struggled with, food. And for some, it can be a little bit lighter that they are replacing the dopamine that they got from
Mhm.
alcohol with sugar. And their brain is saying, oh, that feels good. Keep doing that. Keep doing that. And so we can find that, a lot of women that stop drinking will go through a period of eating more sugar. But we also know there is a connection between alcohol use disorder and eating disorders. And it is really valuable to share what you just did because, I mean, it's so similar in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of tools. And so when I work with people, because my business is the sober nutritionist, when I work with people, I always want to address alcohol first, because just what you said there, that's so powerful, Deborah. We can 100% cut alcohol out of our lives. You don't need it to survive. Food is always a moderation game. And
Mhm.
with moderation comes some thoughts around what we're eating, how we feel about what we're eating, and that food noise that you talk about. I've had many clients who have shared that that is really powerful. And so the tools of getting to the root cause of what state we're looking to change. Anytime we're drinking, we're trying to change our state, whether we're trying to be more relaxed, more fun, more, avoid hard conversations, whether we're trying to avoid anxiety, stress, all of that. Same with food. Why do we call it comfort food? Because we seek comfort from that substance. And it's wired so similar to the way that alcohol is. And so it's valuable when we can do the work around alcohol, we'll have a lot more tools to address
Right.
that challenges with food.
With your NLP training, did you guys ever get into, like to dislike and compulsions?
I didn't do any NLP training. I'm just
Oh, okay.
fascinated by it. So
Okay.
I can't wait to hear. Tell us more.
So there's a process, and it's actually in the NLP Made Simple course that we have online. So if anybody wants to check it out, it's nlpmadesimple.com, and it's amazing starter course. It's basically a simplified version of a practitioner. So there's a thing called submodalities, it's jargonistic. It's basically how we encode and give meaning to the movie going on inside our mind. And so, for an example, we have strategies that we do. A strategy is how we do a behavior internally and externally. So, what are we doing in our mind that then kicks off the external behavior to do something, whether it's successful or not successful? And so, when I was going back to my food strategy, and this is we find for a lot of people, is that whenever they have the trigger, or we like to call it activation because it's a little bit more positive, it's an activation because there's a learning through it. An
Mm,
activation happens in your environment, and or internally, perhaps you're beating yourself up. That's the activation point, and or externally, there's some sort of stressful situation or a combination of both. Then all of a sudden, in your mental screen, and it's completely out of most people's awareness, there's a visualization of something that kicks off the behavior. And I'm sure some of you have experienced this, where all of a sudden you wind up here in the door in the refrigerator and you're like, how did I get here? Or the pantry. There's a strategy that's happening internally that then had you create that external behavior. When you can figure out what that is, what the visualization, we do like to dislike. So for an example, chocolate, well, actually gum was a big one for me. And so um, I would use gum as a way to diet. I also would use it as a way of not using drugs. So it was like a way of putting something in there to then fill the void so that I wouldn't go for the food or the drugs. And so I got addicted to gum, obviously, and I would chew a whole pack, sometimes 2 packs a day. Brandon would find, early on in our process together, he'd find, like, gum wrappers in the bed. One time, like, there was gum, like, on the pillow because he's like, the shameful thing that I was doing. It was hilarious. But so I'm like, we gotta do something with the gum. So I switched it out with a vomit inside my mental image. And so anytime that I would think of gum, automatically I would smell vomit. And so what it does is it takes the charge off of these compulsions, and then you replace it with something else instead. And so what I replaced it with instead, which I didn't like as much, of course, as gum, but electrolyte water, right? And so then filling yourself up with something that's a benefit. And so these are like some of the cool hacks that you can do with NLP to rewire the brain and the mind to then create new behaviors. And so you can also play with this with body dysmorphia, because most people don't realize the reason why they binge, purge, and or do anorexia is connected to the parts of ourselves with internal family systems. That's part of it. However, there's a mental image that somebody has that's completely distorted that's driving this to then have these parts activate and work together in different ways. And so when you can get to the root of that, it's amazing what magic can happen.
Yeah, and it is fascinating to try to understand it when you're on the outside of it, because I've been fortunate to I've got plenty of foibles and challenges in my life, but body dysmorphia and food noise has never been one of them. But I have a good friend who her image, she's about my size and I'm a tiny person. When she looks in the mirror, she sees herself as fat. And
Right.
so I'm very curious and interested in what that mechanism is as you're describing it. And so, but what I also see is that those hacks or tools are available for any of the things that we struggle with, whether it is body dysmorphia and eating disorder, or falling into
Alcohol.
complaining, or even just like something as simple as complaining.
Right.
Right? And those types of things that and certainly alcohol. And so understanding more about that, as a practitioner just allows me as a coach to get more to build more compassion, understanding, and tools to help people. And so, yeah, I think that NLP is continues to be a fascination for me. And Deborah, maybe it's your course I'm going to sign up for, because I definitely am ready for more training when it comes to understanding how to help clients with, like you said, the whole time thing. And I think there's mind mapping. There's all kinds of things that are part of the processes associated with NLP that I think can be super valuable for any of us who are on a quest to learn more about ourselves, to feel like we are empowered to thrive in this world, that we're integrating, as you've talked about. It's beautiful.
Thank you, thank you. We would love to have you. Then other fascinating thing, if we have time too, with the NLP. So, NLP is one of the modalities. Part of the modality of NLP that then has been adapted is timeline work. Like you said, the timeline is really fascinating, especially with addiction and body dysmorphia, anorexia, bulimia. We find that there's a pattern that it gets passed down, right, through the generations. You could say it is from modeling. Obviously, whenever you've been raised, my mom was anorexic when I was little. She was going through a lot. In my family, the story was if you're fat, it's considered ugly, but it's also you're like lazy.
Mhm.
So this was talked about in our family, and it was kind of like this underlining thing is that fat is shameful and you should feel guilty at the unconscious level. And it's also something that, like with alcohol addiction, they say that, it's passed down through the DNA and the bloodline. I believe, and I don't know if you've ever researched Dr. Bruce Lipton, it talks about epigenetics. And
Mhm.
so we can go back on our timeline of our ancestral timeline and do trauma release work from the past. And we have seen people that have had labs done that do this transformational work, this lifetime wound work, as well as ancestral work, and their labs change afterwards. And the fascinating thing is too, is their kids change. I mean, it's tapping into the field, and this is backed by science. The field mice study where they had a field mouse where they would smell a cherry blossom and do conditioning where they would shock the field mouse. 8 generations down the line would still have a knee jack, like little freeze up from the smell of it. And so thinking about what happens with us as humans, same thing, no matter what color of our skin, no matter what our background is, at some point our ancestors have probably experienced genocide, rape, war, famine, and so that stuff is passed down through our DNA, and we don't have to be a victim of the DNA. We can go back and clear it. And then, of course, with nutrition and all the things, rewire the body, mind, and spirit to believe and do something different.
Yeah, I was first introduced to the concept of epigenetics in nutrition school. And I also think, I've touched on exploring more about generational trauma. And, we see exactly what you're talking about is that somebody is fearful of the water, but they have no idea. They go back 4 generations and find out that an ancestor, their child, drowned in a river.
Right. Yep.
And now they are afraid of the water and they pass it on, and no one knows why. But we
Right.
grow up with this genetic component from that original trauma. And yeah, and it hijacks us in so many different ways. And so just understanding that, we can't change our genetic code, but we can change the expression of our gene,
Right.
right? And so that is really at the heart of epigenetics, is the expression of those genes. And that can be impacted by so much, certainly mindset, but also nervous system regulation, nutrition, community, the people we spend time with. All of those things are a beautiful part of that. So, oh my gosh, we may have to have part two because this has
I
been
know.
so fascinating, Deborah.
We're just getting started.
Yes, yes, and I love all this, I love to nerd out on it, but I also think that we can make it very practical. So
Right.
tell our audience how they can connect with you and, what's the best way to get started in this process of doing this underlying work through the lens of something like NLP?
Yeah, so one great way is nlpmadesimple.com. And I think when you enroll in that online program, you also get a bonus where it is called the Breakthrough Accelerator. So not only are you learning NLP, the science of the mind and communication, but you're also getting to do this self transformative experience with the timeline work. And I focus on my husband and I focus on letting go of the big six: anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, and shame. Imagine like how light you would feel if you cleared some of that from the past. And then also the identities that are holding us back, like I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I can't have what I want, all the different things, or even the belief system that, we're limited in a lot of ways, like if we've had a diagnosis. And so that's a really amazing place to start. We also have our Your True Alchemy podcast, and that's free on YouTube as well as Spotify. And we would love to have you on as well. And we could do a podcast swap because we can nerd out with all these different things we're talking about.
Mm. I love
Yeah.
that you have a podcast because I do think it's a way for listeners to, connect and get more of the concept. And then I love the idea of digging into, um, uh, and now I'm losing my mind, nlpmadesimple.com. So thank
Yeah.
you for that,
Yeah.
Deborah. And thank you for a very rich and interesting conversation that I think will really appeal to my listeners. So I so appreciate getting to know you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I'm super, super grateful. Hopefully, some of my experiences will land with some of your listeners and bring value to their life.
Yeah, awesome. All right.
I want to thank you for tuning in to the Sober Edge podcast. This is a place for important conversations and a safe place to question everything you thought you knew about drinking. If you're looking for your sober edge, I want to invite you to connect with me at thesobernutritionist.com, where you can grab my free resource, Becoming More, a guide to loving your sober life. And I would be so grateful if you enjoyed this podcast, if you would leave a rating and review, as it will help more people find their sober edge.